Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Product Manager podcast. Today's guest, I don't know where to begin, but he's led product at some of the most impactful AI and machine learning teams in tech. So Instagram ranking and relevance, Meta ads, Llama Gen AI, Google Search, Cloud, Lyft's marketplace, a data annotation startup called Turing, and more. So I'm very excited to have Deepak Tiwari, who's a product leader who's built world-class discovery, search, monetization products that power billions of interactions and drive some serious revenue. Deepak, great to have you on the podcast.
Great to connect and be on this podcast as well, Shobit. Thank you for inviting me.
We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff around AI, around who's hiring PMs, what it takes to get in, tools you'll be using. But let's start with some warm-up questions to just get to know you a little bit better. So you've led at the intersection of AI and products for over a decade. Let's go back and just understand, when was the first moment you realized that I want to build products for a living?
I think in many ways I was obsessed with building things, since childhood. Growing up, I was really obsessed with like big yellow trucks and playing with them. And in many ways, like those are products. And in some interesting ways, through my career, I got an opportunity to work on those as well at Caterpillar. And then also another product that I was really obsessed with, probably all of us were, was Nintendo, playing games on Nintendo and things like that. So I think there was some aspect of building things, tinkering with things that was there from like early childhood, and as growing through the school. But I think in all earnestness, I think it really began. Some of these things led me to become, to become an engineer. And then after engineering, after being an engineer for many years and doing a lot of work in on the electronic side and coding software side, I went to business school, so really like develop my thinking, like broader aspects of business and strategy. And then I did management consulting for some time. And there was a time in my career when I really thought it's like, hey, I really enjoy technology. I'm really passionate about that. And I'm really also passionate about making impact on people's lives and also with strategy and how do we think long term and the vision aspect of that. And what is a role that combines both of those? And I felt like product management was a role that it seemed to me like that combined both of those, especially working in an area like in big tech or in tech in general. So that's what really attracted me, and I realized that I really wanted to do long term.
Would you agree with me that like the best combination for product management is to do your undergrad from IIT and then go to Kellogg for business school? That seems to be a pattern here, right?
I was talking to my wife yesterday about this, and I'm like, as I was looking through, it's like Shobit and I, you and I have like so much in common. Like, both went to IIT, we both went to Kellogg School of Management, we both worked at Google. So I think you left out Google for some reason, but yeah, I feel like that's like could be a good recipe for success, I believe. But yeah, I think, and you did management consulting as well before Google. So I think, yeah, so I think there's a lot of parallels between our careers. Yes.
Perfect. Everyone knows the recipe. Let's end the podcast here. We're good to go. I'm just kidding, of course. So let's talk about, as you went to Google, what were like some of the early beliefs that you might have about tech or product that you've changed your mind about?
Actually, there's a lot more that I learned at Google that I actually think still believe in it. It has been actually more and more reinforced rather than things that I might have like left behind. But I would say like one thing that I maybe learned a little bit early that I don't think is like absolutely true or should be taken with some caveat is like really about obsessing over data. I feel like you must obsess over data. In some part of my life, I was also a data scientist. I really understand how important it is to really obsess over data. But data also has limitations, especially in an area like technology where things are just moving so fast. So if you're a product manager, I think understand like obsess over data, but understand the limitations and also have a very strong intuition, especially when technology is changing so fast. And there might be a lot of things that data might not be measuring at the time when you are making decisions. So having like, I believe I never worked at Amazon, by the way, but Amazon has like this principle, like how can you make really good decisions with like imperfect data? And I feel like that's one thing to uh, sort of keep in mind is to, yes, obsess over data, but also understand the limitations of it, and then have a very strong POV and intuition as a product manager. They can be wrong. You can always evolve them. I think that's one thing that I would say like has evolved for me over time. But there's a lot of other things at Google that I learned, especially like Google has one of the this that has a very culture of very technical product managers, and I feel like especially with all the stuff that's happening with AI ML and how things are changing, that aspect of being a PM, where you should have appreciation for technology, deeply understand technically what is happening, not from a code perspective perhaps, but like technically how things work, is really, really important. So I think many of those beliefs that I learned first have been reinforced, and then some have evolved.
As you were talking about this, about intuition plus data, it almost reminds me of management consulting as well, where we were like highly encouraged to have a day one answer and then use data to either get rid of that hypothesis or prove it and whatnot. And I think that carried forward in product management as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that combination of like how do you inform strategy with data, but also understand where the macro trends are going, and in where we don't have like availability of perfect data, how do you make decisions and how do you drive that? I think I agree. I think that art, it almost becomes like an art rather than science here.
Let's move on and let's now start to dig into some of the deeper topics. Now, on this podcast, nothing is more exciting for people when we talk about hiring and where the job market is going, because it's a weird time for the job market. Some candidates feel like no one's hiring, others see AI everywhere and assume demand is exploding. So you've led and hired across both cycles, like downturn and growth. So let's start with, from your vantage point, which parts of big tech are hiring product managers right now?
I think all parts of big tech are hiring product managers, but I think where I see most of the activity right now is around machine learning, AI, and infrastructure. So those are some of the areas. There might be some like there might be some biases there as well, because that's also the background I come from. So maybe through my network and stuff like that, those things are a little bit more visible to me. But I feel like there's a lot of activity, even hiring at senior levels, for roles that are sort of related to PMs that are going to go deep into machine learning, AI, infrastructure, data for or data warehousing, for machine learning applications, sort of across the board. So I think those are some of the areas that I'm seeing a lot of activity in currently. But I do believe, like I meet with people like even at Meta and others, like there's hiring that is happening across the board, like PMs who work on experience part, who work on marketplaces and other things. So I feel it's happening. I do feel like there is some truth to the fact that I believe during the COVID period there was like a big hiring that happened in big tech or tech in general, and um, and then many of the other like financial phenomena were also happening at that point of time. And I feel like the market has a little bit corrected itself. I think if you still look at cumulatively, there are probably more roles in tech. But I feel like if you see the trend of growth and stuff like that, it seems like it has shrunk. But I don't think it has really shrunk. It has probably the rate of growth has slowed down a little bit. And I think there's more targeted hiring in certain areas.
I totally agree on the targeted hiring. It seems like people are getting more specific about what they're looking for. Let's talk a bit about companies, because there's a myth that FANG is like the place to be always. Now, you've seen other companies, maybe lesser known than FANG. What are some of the under the radar companies that you tell product managers to seriously consider right now?
I don't think any of these are like under the radar, especially if you're in like San Francisco Bay Area or any of like the tech hubs. I think these are probably well-known names already, but I will still like mention a few names. Like Glean. There's a lot of these companies that are building on top of the large language models to help enterprises do interesting things with the data that they have. So I think Glean is an example. SF Compute, there's a lot happening in infrastructure area. Perplexity, of course, everybody knows about Perplexity, but a great company is still growing really, really fast. Uh, lot of we always hear about OpenAI and Anthropic, but there are other companies in this area that are doing fairly well, like Cohere, Midjourney, Replete. Um, uh, I believe Replete also just announced some partnership with Google. 11 Labs. Like there's a lot happening on like text to voice, and then maybe a little bit of I won't say like old stalwarts, but like stalwarts that have been there for a while, still innovating, like Snowflake, especially under the new CEO, Sridhar, and then Databricks. I think those are great. Great. Also, like some companies that have been founded by friends of mine from like Google and other places, like ChainGuard. Other places that I have sort of worked at or admire, like Turing, Mercor, Reddit, Pebble. So there's a lot of these companies that are like continuing to reinvent themselves, and like there's a lot of interesting roles, and a lot of my friends work there, and I hear like fantastic culture and growth there. So I think like those are a few that I would mention. But I personally feel like there are a lot of choices beyond Fang as well, who are also growing faster, perhaps.
Let's talk a bit more about different levels. So, product management expectations can be different depending on level, domain. Let's take some level, like mid level, let's say Google L5 equivalent, to more senior levels, the L6 plus roles and AI or infra team. What do candidates often misunderstand about the transitions across these levels?
Yeah, so there are like many different dimensions when we look at like a PM ladder, for example, and how the expectations change with different levels. And some of those key dimensions are like scope will change, ambiguity of the work that you're doing will change, the time horizon for which you're trying to solve will change, your expectation of it will change. Ownership and agency, the expectation there also changes drastically, but with as you shift through these and get promoted through these levels. So as an example, like at an L5, PM is driving a problem that has like some ambiguity, let's say maybe medium level of ambiguity, but still has maybe like an M1 or M2 or a senior level leader like providing clarity on what really needs to be the vision, how something needs to be done. And L5 is providing like clarity, structure for a problem with some medium level of ambiguity, and then executing well, right, and delivering the impact. And then can also has the ability to look at like medium term time horizon, can maybe put together a vision or a roadmap that looks at least like a year from today, for example. And then of course shows some agency, like in terms of bringing people together. But I think in L6, the ambiguity of the problems that you're solving like changes significantly, and you're expected to bring like step change in clarity and vision and long-term thinking. So you should be able to like then build like a 3-year out vision, 5-year out vision, depending on where you are. Um, and at 7, you're just expected to not just solve those kind of problems, but expected to like proactively being able to identify those opportunities completely independently and then operate completely autonomously with minimal guidance. Of course, like at all levels, guidance is useful in terms of just alignment with the vision and where the company is investing in. But I feel like as you go through those levels, those are the kind of things that will change.
I love the framing around ambiguity. It's something often PMs almost resist. They want more guardrails, but that's also the thing that actually gets them forward. So you mentioned all these different companies. So if someone is scanning job postings, what are like some subtle signals they should look at that tell you, hey, this team or this company is serious about investing in product management?
Yeah, I think one signal I look at is if the company is making some investment in deep tech. Um, and if they're solving something that's a non-trivial problem, technically or from a product perspective. And I think that makes it really makes me believe that they are very serious about investment in engineering and product to solve that particular problem. And I would contrast that with certain companies who might be looking at who might still be tech companies, but might solve some or all of their problems like operationally rather than through product or automation or building technology. But there are many problems that inherently cannot be solved operationally. They have to be, they just happen at such a scale that it has to be done through product. An example would be like everything that pretty much Google does, everything that Meta does, everything that Apple does has to happen from like at some level with product, or pretty much like at all levels with product, because you cannot scale otherwise, like with millions of users and perhaps like tens of billions of impressions that you're driving. There's just no way to do things operationally. So I think if you see that trend that, hey, there's a non-trivial problem to be solved, and it could be for any reason. It could be an experience-based problem that some company is trying to solve, which could be really complex. I feel like, for example, Figma and Miro have solved this design problem really, really well. Like it's like the way they have brought forward the thinking from a more design perspective in a complex environment on how you design products. Um, or if it's like maybe it's a scale problem, like I mentioned, many of these large tech companies are solving scale problem, like including OpenAI now. Like they have like requests or API requests or load that they cannot actually fulfill perhaps in real time, and we have all seen that. So I think like, and that's why they're talking about all this build out for inference and things like that. So I think those are a few things that I would say, um, at least to me, give me a signal that the company is serious about investment in engineering and product.
Deepak, now I'm going to ask you about like the other side of things, which is okay. We talked about which places to go to, but let's talk about what strong candidates do differently. I'll begin with the first question. Let's say somebody comes to you and says, Deepak, I'm looking for a product management role in a big tech company. What should I focus on first? What's your advice for getting laser focused before they apply?
I think at the end of the day, what we are all trying to solve for is our own happiness, right? So I would say, like, start with yourself. What are your interests? Um, just don't blindly chase what is hot if you're not really interested in it. Like an example would be, if you are a PM who's really excited about building experiences, maybe don't chase after like an AI/ML or modeling, like heavy backend type PM role. But if you like heavy backend type PM role, then that would be a great fit. Also, as the industry evolves, like even at Google, there are like these roles that are like outbound PMs versus like the general PM at Google. So Google is also hiring in many areas for outbound PMs. An outbound PM role is a little bit more, almost like a GTM, more customer centric role. So again, if you're more excited about customer centricity day to day, that's what really gets you going. And I feel like start with yourself, like what your interests are, what areas you're interested in, what domains you're interested in, because tech itself is very, very vast. I will maybe take an example from when I started looking back in the day, like 2010, when I left consulting to come to tech. At that point of time itself, I felt like, hey, tech itself is many, many different things. There's like, now Apple is doing everything, but at that point of time, I thought of Apple as like a sort of consumer electronics company. I thought of Cisco. Now Cisco is doing amazing things with Bebex and everything, but at that point of time, I thought of them as like an enterprise hardware company, and of course Google and Meta as like consumer internet and so on and so forth. So even within tech, you have a lot of diversity. I felt like I was most interested in consumer internet, so I really looked at closely at like Google and Meta, Facebook at that point of time. Um, and I had like maybe a short list. I didn't go too deep, like 4 or 5 companies that I had, and I started with them. And then I had like a very clear strategy of how I want to reach out, and through referrals and other ways, and applying for roles. And so yeah, have a very clear strategy. Look at like look internally, what are you most interested in? Have your short list, what you want to do. And I personally feel like that would be a recipe for success.
Your core advice is start with yourself and optimize for your happiness, and then the strategy you built aligned with that guiding principle. Great. This is where I see a lot of product managers make a mistake. Like they often describe themselves by job titles or years of experience. You've talked about aligning around problems solved. So can you walk us through how a candidate might clearly define the types of problems they're great at solving, and how does that come across in hiring conversations?
Yeah, I think at the core of it's about narrative and storytelling, which again, interestingly, VPMs are supposed to be good at, right? So in a way, think of yourself as a product. So what is the story and narrative behind your product? Like that is yourself. Um, and if your story tells like a coherent path, clear impact, and meaningful work in the area that you want to go into, um, and also like how did you make some of those things happen? Like what was your role? Like was it purely execution, or you actually set the vision. I think those are really, really important things. And sometimes we feel that that vision and strategy has to be like at a very meta, like umbrella level or something like that. That's not true. Like I do believe, like for example, if you're working at a company like Datadog or ServiceNow, and you laid the foundation for better observability or better visibility through dashboards for the user, for developers, or for the users. Let's say at ServiceNow, like dashboards and metrics that allow users to see like how they what is the state of their workflows, and what is healthy, what is unhealthy, and things like that. And if you just laid the foundation for that, that's a great story. But you should tell that story even if in a like wider sort of scope of thing that was just a feature. That's completely fine, because that's like a very strong story. You laid the foundation. You probably had wrote a vision document. You convinced people. If you can bring that story out, I think, and make that connection with what you're seeking, I think that's really, really important. By the way, I have a close friend of mine who did that at ServiceNow. He's at Salesforce. So yeah, I would say like that narrative and story is really, really critical.
Now, we both know metrics matter, especially in machine learning, AI roles. What kind of impact metrics do you love to see on a resume, especially for PMs in these domains?
Yeah, I feel like depending on what problem you're trying to solve, I think definitely top line metrics make a lot of sense. Like revenue, like if you drove revenue, if you drove like time spent, if you drove conversion, those are amazing. But I feel like there's other secondary metrics like adoption. Let's say if you launch something brand new, a lot of times by the time it actually has an impact on revenue or time spent and stuff like that, it takes certain time. Like it might be like 6 months later when like there's significant impact on revenue that you can talk about. But I think immediately there are other metrics like adoption, how many people are who saw that particular feature actually adopted it, and then engagement metrics on it. Like did they like it? Did they actually take action based on what you were recommending, for example? Yeah, for roles that are more AI, ML, and ranking related, I feel like more Gen AI side, there is like, of course, model quality, and model quality can be thought of in many, many different ways. But it's also good to see, like somebody worked on model quality and they were able to improve that. Like, so this could be like simply things like hallucination, coherence, error rates, model precision and recall. If people call that they worked on certain models and they were able to improve precision, or at certain precision, at very high precision, they were able to do things that improve recall of the model. I think that just also shows depth in understanding of that particular area. Also, there's like in ranking, there's many things that are related to like guardrailing and trust and safety. So if you reduce prevalence of something bad that was happening, like harmful content, for example, or bad search results, whatever it is, right, or any area that you're working on, if you reduce prevalence of something that bad that was happening, or if you increase prevalence of good that was happening, I think those are all really, really good metric, and they go really deeper in understanding. So I think, of course, revenue and time spent are really, really important and those top level metrics. But I think as people write this, and when they don't have to mention everything everywhere, but like as they also mention some of these, like, hey, I worked on this model, improved the precision of recall. This is how we improved the prevalence of certain types of outcomes that we wanted. I think those are really, they also show depth.
I really like that you went into model quality in those metrics as well, because sometimes, like especially in AI/ML, that's a true signal that you're actually not pretending to be a AI PM, which a lot of people are right now. They're sort of splashed it, but like actually can speak to the work that you've done. So I'm glad you mentioned that. We talked a bit about resumes. Let's talk a bit about interview loops. So what's one behavior that you see, like maybe for people, this sounds impressive on the surface, but it's a red flag for hiring managers?
I feel like in many ways we live in a very individualistic society, so I think maybe it's fine. But I feel like, at least for me, that there's a lot of like focus on individual accomplishments rather than any mention of the team. By the way, you don't need to mention team in every answer, but I feel like there are subtle ways to bring in how you're able to, for example, influence a data scientist to do the analysis rather than saying that I jumped in and did all the analysis and I also wrote the prototype. So if the answer is such that I jumped in and did everything to make something successful, I feel like that is a little bit of a red flag for me. I think if the answer is balanced, like where the PM jumped in doing certain things, specifically like strategy and things like that, but also was able to leverage people around them, like data scientists, data engineers, designers, tech leads and things like that. And if their story weaves a message which is going to be more true to how they'll be working day to day with all these XFN counterparts, I feel like if it does not mention XFN counterparts in any of the answers or anywhere in the interview, I feel like that would be a red flag. So I would say that that is one thing. Also, there's a lot of times we want to go deeper into problem statement and what they solved. And I think if the problem is seems shallow, the solution almost seems like, even if in hindsight, just seems like, yeah, of course, that seems very natural. Um, and results were amazing. That also is a little bit of a red flag. I feel sometimes it's a red flag in terms of communication rather than the work that somebody did. But I think when you're interviewing, think very deeply about maybe almost relive the moment when it was really difficult to do something. In hindsight, we always like discount how difficult a particular problem was. But if you're able to bring why it was really difficult to convince people around or to do a certain thing, make it palpable. I would say. Otherwise, it's a red flag.
I love that you're saying this because it's like we've been taught that, hey, don't bring problems, bring solutions. And people tend to discount the problem. And so this story has no drama. It just seems like blah. And I'm glad you're mentioning this. This is music to my ears. On the flip side, what are like some of the signals that you look for that show real product maturity?
There are a few things there. One is like if there is any signal that the person thought from the first principles. It's, by the way, it's very sometimes can be difficult to always show that you solved a problem with first principles because those involve very deep thinking and things like that. But if you're able to bring it in a crisp manner, that you were able to solve like maybe a problem that has already always existed or people know about, but you actually thought about it from first principles and you solved it. I think that is one thing that I really like, purely from a raw intellectual horsepower for a PM. From a more broader perspective of working in a cross-org, cross-functional environment, I think ability to influence, leverage, and align other people, deeply understanding like trade-offs, and making sure that when you're mentioning those trade-offs were actually real trade-offs, explanation of the issues. One example, for example, in my mind is like if a product manager has to make a decision between like hallucination versus creativity, right? We all know we want zero hallucination. Sometimes we say that, but I think there are many use cases we don't want zero hallucination because if you go zero hallucination, you have no creativity. If a model is generating variations of something, all the variations will look the same because it has no room for creativity because you really want to drive hallucination to zero. Now, that is absolutely critical in some use cases. Like, for example, if you're doing like financial underwriting, you don't want any hallucination and you want no creativity, right? The things are just set. But if you're writing an ad, for example, if you're writing an advertisement for like ads copy for something, you want creativity, right? Otherwise, yeah, there's nothing to A/B test then. So I think just deeply understanding some of those things is really, really critical. And then, like I mentioned, first thinking principle, ability to influence is really, really critical. Yeah.
I really like that example that you gave because it's like as a user, I don't want to review terrible financial classifications, but I'm totally cool with some terrible ads that you generate if you give me like 2 or 3 that I would have never thought of and it's a winner. So it really appeals. It really brings it to light. That's a good foray to go further into AI ML products. That will be like the last big topic that we'll cover in this podcast. So, you've done this many years across ranking, ads, discovery, Gen AI. Let's start to unpack some of those. So let's say you inherit a product with declining engagement and the team believes, hey, let's use ML to help. How do you question that? Like, what are some of the first things you might ask that helps you assess whether this is really something that should be solved with machine learning or something else entirely?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is where some of the things that you were talking about, like intuition as a product manager and POV is really, really critical. Rather than jumping into solving a particular problem, which might be the wrong problem to solve, as an example. It's also like important to understand what is happening externally or in a macro environment, like compared to landscape. Is that changing? Something changing in the macro environment that you have no control over? You can still do like AI, ML, and ranking and incrementally improve the situation, right? And you can, of course, do A/B test and prove it. but you might not be compensating for everything else that's happening in the more macro trend or competitive landscape. So you might want to think a little bit more broadly to solve for those and to address those. Like an example would be, let's say if you're working, so I worked at Lyft. So if you're working in a ride hailing company, and I feel like ML can actually solve many of the problems in ride hailing, like conversion, pricing, retention, frequency of purchase, ETA. All of those problems are very, very much solvable by ML. But it really cannot solve the problem if the top of the funnel is broken. That means let's assume that you don't have enough, you're in a supply constrained environment and you don't have enough drivers. And something is happening, something is broken in onboarding the drivers. AI/ML will not be able to fix it. Now, I mean, AI/ML can help in terms of if it's broken because during the onboarding there's some step in terms of verification is broken. So maybe you can automate that with the AI/ML. But there may be other operational challenges that you might not be aware, right? There might be some growth related challenges there. So again, AI/ML can solve growth as well, but potentially. But I feel like if you are trying to solve for the funnel and something is broken beyond that, I think like AI/ML is not the right way. Or you're applying AI/ML in the wrong place. You will still improve things, which is good. Like so, relative like A and B, you'll improve it, but you're not addressing like the core problems. I think it's really important to understand end to end and have that intuition and POV of where things are broken. And then I agree, like let's not just do AI/ML because it's the sort of hot topic of the day, but let's solve most meaningful problem for the business. Yeah.
Let's now bring it to a subset of problems that you worked with quite a bit. So like ranking problems like Instagram or search, you often have to balance like multiple objectives, right? You know, relevance, revenue, creator side, consumer side, safety. How do you frame those trade-offs and how do you make sure teams don't get lost optimizing one metric and get it perfect at the cost of bigger picture?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The way we think about this is like thinking about like the long-term health of the platform. One example could be like if there's baity content. You might have seen this already, but maybe most of the platforms, let's say, have evolved beyond this like things that are very, very obvious. It's very easy now to catch these kind of things. But the interesting thing is like people are also smart who are creating these baits. They're also smart. They keep changing the baits, right? Like one would be like a share bait or engagement, some kind of an engagement bait is like, hey, if you share this with like 100 more people, good things will happen to you, for example. Or like some kind of a loop bait where like it's a very small video, but then you're waiting for something to happen and then it loops, and then you don't realize it's looping, and then the algorithm will reward it because it thinks that they're watching that video multiple times. So there are a lot of these different bait types, but I feel like if you take very strict action and remove those baits, which I think is the right thing to do, then I think in the short term it might actually hurt engagement. But it's in the long term that's the right thing to do. So again, taking that long term view for the platform, long term health is the right way to think about these problems. And then we do that. Like we really think about these things more from a long-term perspective. We have done this like when I was at Google, we thought of like search quality and search results from a long-term perspective, and then similarly at all the other places that I worked at. Yeah.
Let's talk more about Gen AI, another hot topic of the day. Tell me some of the most exciting use cases that you've seen where LLMs really just massively change the product experiences, maybe create stuff that didn't exist before.
I might give some examples that I've been close to, because like one is like advertising itself, right? For example, for a very long time, I've worked at Meta for 5 years total. We have known for a very long time that one of the core frictions pieces in creating a campaign is creative generation. So think about it like you're trying to generate creative. A creative would be some combination of text plus image, video, depending on what ad format you're using. And in many cases, it can take up to weeks for people to generate these kind of things. And I feel like how can we make sure that friction gets taken away? And I feel like Gen AI can really help. Like now, maybe 3 years ago, technology was not there that could assist people who are building these kind of things to help them create these things, generate more variations and things like that. But it's happening now. So I feel like advertising is one aspect. I see this at Google, like all the other platforms as well, like Meta. So there's a lot of interesting things that are happening there. Commerce as well. Like there was a time when if you, well, if you, let's say, reached some digital version of some shop, and then you want to buy something for that particular commerce, if you wanted to chat with somebody, there has to be a human being on the other side. No, no more, right? There's no need for a human being to be available on the other side. You can start chat with an agent, and depending on, let's say, if your question was like, "Hey, I really like this, but do you have this inventory in like this color or something like that?" Whatever your question, or in this size, the agents now actually have entitlements. They can actually go, they can make an API call, understand what is happening, give you suggestions. Like they might say like, "Hey, I don't have green, but I have turquoise. Would you like to see something?" Right? And I think that marrying that generative AI and how that can happen was not really possible like even 2 to 3 years ago. So I feel like, yes, I think research, how that has been enabled, commerce, advertising, there's a lot of things happening in the industry that would not have been possible without Gen AI.
I love it. And some of the recent tools I've been using, I'm just consistently amazed at, okay, they enable me to do something that was just so painful before.
Yeah, I agree. And then also like vibe coding, of course, everybody knows about. Like one thing I really like about, it's not just about coding. A lot of the times when I interact with many of these tools, I ask them architectural questions, and they're actually pretty good. Some of them are very good at answering architectural questions. So that means for you to actually prototype something, do a simulation in a real environment might take like a month. You can actually get an answer in 30 minutes. The answer might not be right, by the way, but I think it intuitively can do certain things and inform you in 30 minutes if you have an architectural option that you wanted to explore and do some simulation. You can do that, which is, I think, amazing. So I think there's a lot of those things that are not possible earlier.
Deepak, I'm going to end by asking you a couple of quick questions. Let's talk about, should product managers spend more time on data reviews or customer interviews?
I would say like customer interviews. If you had to make a choice, like of course, one answer would be like do both or some combination or hybrid or something like that. But if I had to make a smart choice, for example, or if I have to make a choice between going to two of those, like I think like customer interviews are really critical for a PM to be customer centric. Because I feel like you have XFN counterparts, data science TLs who can go to the data review, and you can also like async consume, look at the data dashboards and stuff like that, and do something. But I feel like the customer POV or voice of the customer, I think nobody in the company really can fill that role other than a PM. I feel like, and I also personally think that this is an area that most PMs don't spend enough time on, which is like talking to the customer, doing like attending customer interviews, attending like customer QBRs and meetings and things like that. And I think researching more directly with customers, and I think more of that definitely is needed across the board. So I would go with customer interviews.
I totally agree with you. One underrated product management skills that becomes more valuable as you get more senior and over time.
I feel like maybe it's not underrated, and I'm not sure if it's any more underrated and things like that. But I think a lot of times we hear a lot about like data. We hear a lot about like PM, like strategy and this and that. I feel like one of the biggest capabilities that PM has that also becomes more valuable over time is writing and reading. Perhaps maybe as you grow more and like you have broader scope of things, maybe it's reading, giving comments into documents, like making sure progress is made on documents, and mostly that's how we communicate, right? I mean, there's like, of course, synchronous communication, meetings and things like that. But I think more work gets done that is asynchronous on documents and stuff like that. So just ability to read a lot of documents, ability to consume a lot of documents very, very quickly, especially as you grow and your scope becomes bigger, you might have to consume like 10 documents a day. And some of them that are written very deep and might be like 10 pages each or something like that. So I think that reading and writing are the two skills that I personally feel like are a little bit underrated because I think a lot of PMs, I think, need to continue to work on that.
And then I'll ask you a last question, like what are some books, podcasts, or talks you keep recommending to product managers?
Yeah, I mean, definitely look at like Shobit's podcast and social media posts and stuff like that. I always follow them. So thank you for that, Shobit. But also like, Peter Yang, Lenny's podcast, especially on AI/ML, like Marilyn Nika's posts and her course, and then another friend of mine from Meta, Vikash Rumta. I think these are some people, really great people to follow, and excited about what they're doing. Yeah.
Awesome. Deepak, thank you so much. This has been amazing masterclass in hiring, understanding where PM should go, how they position themselves, and of course, AI and ML products and what's really important there. So first of all, thank you so much for spending the time with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shobit, for again inviting me. It was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it.
What's the best place for listeners to connect with you or learn more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think LinkedIn is a great place. Like just look up Deepak Tiwari at Meta, and we would be hopefully look forward to connecting with more people. Yeah.
I'll be sure to also include it in the show notes. And everyone, if this episode got your wheels turning, you're a product manager looking to level up your positioning, sharpening up your interview game, and land the kind of roles Deepak talked about, which are amazing. Make sure you head to intentionalproductmanager.com. We've helped thousands of PMs now make the leap, and we'd love to help you too. See you all next time. Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.